situation in which household is either unable to access certain energy services, or it has access to energy services, but it is unable to afford them in the needed quality and quantity. So that means that some households, for example, do not have access to electricity grid, or they don't have access to adequate heating. Or, for example, when some households are unable to pay for their energy bills to use their heating, cooling, washing, indoor lighting, and all of the other services that we consider normal and needed for modern energy lifestyle.
I think actually the official definition of energy poverty is pretty useful, and that official definition points to energy poverty as the inability of a household to either access or afford the energy services to meet their needs and ensure a decent standard of living. And there are three really important elements there. The first point is access to energy, and when we talk about access to energy, we quite often talk about people off-grid, so for whom access to the fuels they need to perhaps heat their home is not always guaranteed. But also I think for on-grid households, those perhaps who've been disconnected, for those households also access to energy is restricted. The second of the three elements is affordability, and I think this is the one we think about most when we talk about energy poverty. And clearly, when energy is unaffordable, households end up rationing their energy or rationing other areas of the household budget like food, rationing across the whole household budget, and also not then, even with that energy spend, achieving the levels of energy services they need. And then the final element of that definition is the needs. So the energy services needed to meet households' needs and ensure a decent standard of living. And I think if we just take a moment to think about that, we realise that energy is essential across all of our areas of life, around health and sanitation, around cooking and nutrition, access to services which are so often digital and online now. So, and extending also to social inclusion and educational attainment. So I think within that idea of energy services to ensure a decent standard of living, we can really see how important the right to energy is for all households.
European households, we could say in general, probably nowadays have awareness on benefits of energy efficiency and on benefits of reducing energy consumption in their households, especially if we are talking about energy poor households. When we were investigating cases in Croatia, it was found that actually energy poor households are quite aware of how they could save energy, and they're already implementing those measures. But what is missing is there is a general lack of ability of those households to pay for larger scale measures. So they don't have sufficient funds, for example, to do deep energy retrofit of their house, which maybe they need. They don't have sufficient funds to pay for a new washing machine or to improve their heating system. So we have on one side awareness of households on the benefits of energy efficiency and on the benefits of energy reduction measures. But on the other side, we have quite large-scale lack of ability of them to pay for those needed improvements and to actually implement energy efficiency measures in their households.
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I think that the simple answer is that it differs, of course, between geographies, across social demographics. I would say, though, that I think right now, in the middle of the price crisis that we are suffering, the awareness has gone up hugely of certainly the price of energy, and I think people's attention is drawn to how they can save energy. However, I think beyond some of the simple behavioural measures that are probably quite well known around, turning down thermostats, I'm not sure that households are really clear on some of the more kind of structural, long-term, big energy savings actions that they can take within their home. And here, of course, I'm thinking about kind of insulation and other renovation measures. So I think it's really important that we don't lose this window of opportunity right now where households are engaged, motivated to really empower people to respond to their concerns about the price crisis in very positive ways, rather than just through extra energy rationing and stress.
European institutions have proposed a variety of measures to reduce energy consumption in households. When we are talking about energy poverty, those measures have started with 2009 electricity and gas directives, where member states for the first time have been given requirements to actually protect energy vulnerable households. So this was one of the first measures. Now with the new legislation, European Green Deal, Fit for 55, we expect larger scale measures for energy efficiency improvements in the households. However, many of those measures are very dependent on actual member states implementing them.
I think at the European level, we're seeing a really big step change happen at the moment. So going particularly in the building sector, household sector, going from an approach where we've previously relied on information measures, advice, incentives, to one where actually I think we're seeing much firmer policies come forward, and also a change in targeting. I think a lot of our incentive programs have tended to incentivize better off households who can respond to an incentive but also invest their own money. So the energy efficiency support measures have tended to prioritize or supported higher income households. So the other change we're seeing now at the moment, I think, which is really important, is that we are seeing more measures focused on prioritizing low income households. And I think, as I said, this is incredibly important at this moment in time with the price crisis. And just a couple of examples to illustrate those measures. So, of course, we're seeing higher energy efficiency targets within the Energy Efficiency Directive, but also completely new, we're seeing a proposal coming forward now for a guaranteed proportion of the energy savings under Article 7, now 8 of the Energy Efficiency Directive for low-income households. So that will mean every member state actually has to prioritise a proportion of their energy savings nationally for low-income households. And we're also seeing in the Buildings Directive the introduction of mandatory renovations through minimum energy performance standards, which target the worst performing buildings first, which is very important for targeting the homes that disproportionately low-income households live in. So I think these are two very robust measures actually that we're seeing coming forward that show this step change in our approach.
Citizens have a wide range of possible measures that they could do. So usually the households would benefit if they are energy efficient from a thorough energy efficiency improvement of the whole building envelope. However, sometimes that is too costly, so maybe the citizens cannot afford that measure if there is no direct financing from the state or EU funds or some other source of financing, but then they can maybe do some of the smaller measures. For example, they could put draft proofing on their windows and doors, so there are like little rubbers that you can put behind old windows. You can also do reflective walls behind radiators to avoid unnecessarily heat loss. You can also put aerators on water taps or just replace indoor lighting, which is quite cheap measure, and it can still contribute to energy reductions.
Well, speed is really the challenge here, isn't it? With only 4 or 5 months from now to the next start of the next heating system, we really need to look, I think, at all the measures that can be delivered quickly. And of course, we know that building renovation measures, insulation measures, take time to plan. And we also know that we have some supply chain constraints. So I think to date, there's been a lot of focus in communications on some of the behavioural measures around reducing thermostats, temperatures within our rooms. But I really have a note of caution here, because I think some of these measures can be very dangerous, particularly for the lower income proportions of our households, where these households are already underheating. So encouraging people to turn down a thermostat to then live in unhealthy, dangerously cold homes, I think over a heating system is going to be really problematic. So what are the things that we can do now? I think we do need a mass rollout of the simple measures like loft insulation targeted to low-income households. And I think loft insulation is one of the good measures as an example of what we can do, is because it can be installed non-professionally. In fact, just 2 weeks ago, I was in a loft of a rental home, topping up the loft insulation myself before the new tenants moved in to make sure their bills in the next winter are lower. So I think on an individual support level, an individual community level, this is a measure that we could really roll out targeted to low-income households. And I think the other key thing that people can look at is reducing, turning down the boiler settings. So this doesn't mean turning down the thermostat in your room, but many boilers are set at the moment to deliver very, very hot water into our pipes and radiators. And those boilers actually could work much more efficiently if delivering slightly lower temperature water into our pipes and radiators, but still delivering the same comfort in the rooms. And that's another relatively simple way that people could explore reducing their energy use this winter. I would just say finally, though, that for this winter coming, many households will be hugely reliant on the price protection measures that we're seeing most national governments come forward with.
In Croatia, when we're talking about energy services access for households, there is a very good access to electricity, so most of households are connected to the electricity grid. And also most of households have some form of heating system in their house. What the households are usually lacking in Croatia, especially when we are talking about energy poor households, is the ability to pay for adequate amount of energy services. So we would have, for example, households that do have heating, but it would be only fuel wood stove in one room, which is not sufficient to heat the whole house. And also we would have examples where houses are very inefficient and get very, very hot during the summer, especially in the coastal area, and they have no cooling system in place. So energy poverty is also a summer problem. In general, in Croatia, we have problem with paying for adequate amount and quality of energy services rather than actual access.
I think the great shame in the answer to that question is that actually no. In the UK, we have, I think, the longest history of any European country of energy poverty. In the UK, we call it fuel poverty policies. We had our first fuel poverty strategy over 20 years ago now, and yet we still have a huge problem with fuel poverty in the UK. We have a price cap, an energy price cap, that protects households to some extent from very high prices, but even under that price cap, we've already seen prices go up by a third. So the average household bill has gone up by a third over the summer. The price cap will then rise again in the October this year, and we expect to see prices now for the winter coming being double the price of the average bill from compared to last year. And really the impact of that is that we're expecting to see some areas in the UK where fuel poverty might affect up to 50% of households. So it's not a great news story from the UK, and a lot more needs to be done to tackle the housing stock. And the housing stock in the UK is the least efficient in Europe, and we have not done enough to tackle that.
REGEA is currently, together with City of Zagreb, developing the first program for mitigating energy poverty in Croatia. It will be a program of the City of Zagreb, and it will deliver an overview of the situation in the city together with measures and the whole action plan on how to implement those measures. REGEA is also currently implementing a wide range of EU-funded projects. For example, we are currently implementing project shares, where we are planning to set up first energy communities in Croatia, in which we will enable local community citizens to invest in renewable energy sources, where they will actually directly benefit from those renewable energy sources, and it will help their household budget, therefore reducing their vulnerability to energy prices and decreasing the likelihood of them becoming energy poor.
I think there's some really interesting projects, particularly at European level, so European funded projects that bring together stakeholders from different countries. Increasingly, I think we see more and more of these projects focusing on energy poor households. Just give you a flavour of a few of them, focusing on engaging with different stakeholder groups, so different actors that are going to need to be engaged in the alleviation of energy poverty. And so, for example, there's a project called Social What, and that's working with utilities, working with our energy suppliers to support them to help their household customers in energy poverty. Another project called STEP, working with consumer organisations, and obviously consumer organisations being very closely engaged already with low-income households, perfect way to provide advice and support to those households. And then a last project, NPOR, which is working with stakeholders in the private rented sector. And we know that actually in the private rented sector in many countries, we see higher levels of energy poverty. So I think these are just three really good examples of how projects across Europe are really engaging with diverse stakeholders to address this complex problem of energy poverty. I think the other final exciting movement that I would point to is the movement of citizen-led sustainable energy communities. And I think this is, although of course not every community in Europe has the benefit of an energy community in their local area, where they are in existence and they are multiplying at the moment, which is good news, they are incredibly powerful. And just to give an example actually from my own experience, I until very recently was very closely involved in my local energy cooperative, South East London Community Energy. And this is a very small organisation, but actually working across the board to provide solutions for the community's sustainable energy needs. And so the centre of the model is investment in solar photovoltaics on the roofs of community buildings and schools, providing much lower bills to those schools. But also that organisation is providing outreach and advice to low-income households and communities to help them with their energy bills, to help them access energy efficiency schemes. And finally, this organisation is also developing a support model for those households who can afford to pay for a renovation but need technical support to find out what they need to do and then navigate their way through that renovation. So I think that's just a really good example, and certainly an example I've been inspired by, of how small local organisations can really be the key to accessing the benefits.